Come on in, sit down. Since we have pretty much a full house, we're just going to jump right into the program. It's wonderful to see you all here, hurricane notwithstanding. I'm Deborah Jensen, I direct the Franklin Humanities Institute, and when I was first appointed last spring, I worked out with the deans and the provost's office that our third humanities laboratory would be, in quite a long-term sense, dedicated to digital humanities. And it works with the PhD lab, and so it is a combined graduate and digital humanities space. Of course, digital humanities exist in many other parts of Smith Warehouse, the library, and all over campus, which is why we've made it a priority. We think that over time, we will all be represented in this field of work, even more than we are currently. And with a mastermind like Victoria Zabo and all of the brilliant colleagues that she works with, we know that we can't lose. So now we will continue.
And I'm Caroline Roselius. I am a founding mother of the Wired Lab. We discovered about 6 years ago that digital tools were transforming the way we think about our subjects, changing the questions that we were asking, and really making scholarship take completely new directions. So we sort of decided that we needed to do something about it, and we have been doing something about it. And Victoria Zabo, who's coming up here in just a second, has been a fundamental part of this group. And I'm glad to see so many colleagues here. One thing that hasn't happened until now at Duke is to have a kind of overview of all the different projects, the tools they're using, the questions they're asking, and where these projects are going. So I'm very grateful to the FHI and to Victoria for organizing this day, when we'll find out more about each other and each other's work. And so thank you very much. Over to you.
All right, thank you. No opening event can really happen without the ceremonial several people saying something. So so I just wanted to talk very briefly about my idea of what our Digital Humanities Initiative can be. And when you hear about yet another initiative at Duke, there's a certain amount of eye rolling that might go on because we have so many initiatives already. And this lovely picture I took at the keynote reflects to me what I think of as part of the goal for this Digital Humanities Initiative, which is to really bring together the disciplinary versions of digital humanities, the interdisciplinary, the way that we have teaching and research applications already happening all over campus, thinking about new ways of doing scholarship in a collaborative way. Those are vertical and horizontal integrations, or the fact that we have people doing critical and reflective and theoretical work about digital humanities here. At the same time, we have a strong crossover into the arts. I think this is one of the unique and distinctive aspects of how digital humanities work gets done here at Duke, that there is this other component. It's not just doing text analysis, or it's not just approaching things from one discipline or another, but really thinking creatively about new forms of scholarly expression and creative expression and how they can work with each other. And then of course the algorithmic and generative. I think that digital humanities here, we've clearly seen that it's extended into things like game studies. We had a humanities lab called, I never remember now, Greater Than Games, Transmedia Applications, Virtual Worlds, and Digital Storytelling, that a number of us here were involved with. We had the Jenkins Collaboratory, we had the Visual Studies Initiative, and the Media Arts and Sciences group, the Wired Lab, but then also things like our MFA, and the work that we're now doing in our various PhD programs. So there's so much happening here across the board. But then there's also the public and engaged side of digital humanities that we're seeing through things like the Polymerging Project, for example. That there's also this element that isn't necessarily about technological innovation, but can be as much about innovative uses of technologies. And in the realm of digital humanities, sometimes there's this, are you inside or are you outside? Do you get to call yourself a digital humanist? I don't care about any of that. I think that if you want to be a part of it, if you want to self-identify, then do it, in the best spirit of identity politics. And I think also that the idea of global digital humanities and local digital humanities are elements that we really should and need to reach out and embrace a little more actively. Things like social media analysis, or even thinking about transformative uses of technology and data out in the world. There's so many different ways that we can think about it. And the beautiful thing at Duke is that in some ways we're late to the party in labeling what we do, digital humanities, but because we're late to the party, we get to redefine the term in this really rich and complex and nuanced way. So DH plus is the way I'm calling this, and DH plus is amplifying what we do in the humanities, augmenting it, and transmuting it into other forms. It's a little alchemy thing in there. So in terms of the things that I'm hoping are going to happen with our Digital Humanities Initiative over the next few years, this is a picture of people in the Stamford Express, which is a 24-person boat that we recently took out at Jordan Lake. I'm a rower, if you guys don't know that. And I love this picture because there's all these people who are in a boat, and yet they're all kind of doing their own wacky thing, and yet somehow the boat is going to move. And that to me feels like what's happening here. And so what I'd like to see us do is think about how we can, and this got, and I was making this slide late last night, so forgive me. We can connect all our efforts as we row. We can share the infrastructure that's the boat. We can find a common direction. This gets really painful. We can honor divergent paths, like boats are essentially trying to collide with each other. We can push boundaries of ourselves. We can support our strengths of ourselves and others, but also find limits. I took the thing out of there about crashing and failure, because I think that was too much of a downer. But it's also a real possibility, and even in the PhD lab now, we're talking about that. The freedom to fail. The fact that sometimes when you try something out, it doesn't work, or it ends up looking bad, or it doesn't show you the results that you expected. All of these are part of DH as well, and doing all of that together. And just to very briefly touch on a few things that are already happening, we talked about the PhD lab, which has been going since 2012. That's continuing on strongly with at least 35 graduate students and other scholars working together from Duke, UNC, and NC State. They're in about 7 working groups, I think. We're trying to work actively with our library and IT partners to think about support structures, but also just collaborations across conventional lines within the university, and doing lots of events, of course. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight is that we're going to be rebooting the STEAM Challenge, which is STEM plus Arts and Humanities, as a contest across the campus. And that is going to have the theme of making humanities data come alive. This ties nicely in with the Archives Alive initiative and the From the Archives Performance Initiative, and this whole concept of analog and digital together. So not thinking so much about digital work as being over here, but as being another thread through the cloth of what we're doing together. And then future things, we're going to figure these out together, but some of what we've talked about are doing DH on the edge, lunchtime talks over in the library, developing curricular modules and workshops. This is something that happens all over the place already, but doing it in such a way that we're working together to make them more efficient and effective. The Trinity DH and the library DH staff are working really hard on those things already. And then working with the Triangle Digital Humanities Network to talk about larger questions of what it means to transform scholarship with the digital or transform publishing with the digital. And then finally to think about how to get some big money. So, and the last thing I just want to say about that is this event is called Conversations in the Digital Humanities at Duke. This is the start of the conversation. This is the first moment, but we hope that many more will continue. So thank you, and we're going to get going now with our first group, Project Box.
Whoa. Opening on scholarship. What's a metaphor for a garage door opening? Or rather, what is a metaphor? Hello, we're here representing Project Box, and we have 17 seconds, apparently.
No pressure, but you've already used 5 of them.
Exactly. I'll just tell you very briefly about this. In order to understand this project, you have to realize that philosophy exists in a different time than you do. So in order to understand philosophy in the United States and the English-speaking world, you have to imagine right now it's about 1975. So Gerald Ford is the president, and they're just now beginning to wonder, gee, maybe we should do something with this canon of white male philosophers we've been teaching for centuries, and maybe there are some women or philosophers of color or people from the 19th century who thought about abolitionism or something. who we should be teaching or thinking about or publishing about. So if it's 1975 in your field, maybe that's roughly what was going on. That's happening now in the history of philosophy. So you're laughing, but it's actually true. But the cool thing is the only way in which it's not 1975 is we have the web. So instead of publishing, a nice collection of essays by forgotten philosophers, people who didn't make it into the canon, we can do this. And we can have partners around the world who are teaching in English or in French or in German who can use our website for promoting scholarship, for understanding forgotten figures. And I'll just tell you one tiny little thing, which is you probably think, oh, the reason people didn't teach Emily du Châtelet, who's looking at you right now, for example, or Anne Conway, is that they were not allowed to be members of the academy in a literal sense or able to publish, and so they never really made a mark in history. And that's why they were never taught in the past. But it turns out historically that's completely wrong. In fact, many of them, Madame de Châtelet right there is probably the best example. We're extremely famous, in her case in the 18th century, translated into many languages, taught and discussed, and Frederick the Great knew about her, and all kinds of philosophers talked about her views, and then they disappeared. And our job is to find them and put them on the web.
Thanks. So I think that was Andrew Janiak and those Millowitz from the libraries. You can tell from the way Andrew tells the story, this is a really compelling story. It was really exciting. As soon as he told me about Emily de Châtelet, I was like, I saw that on PBS. It was a story, and she was Voltaire's lover, and she died, and I was, oh yeah, it's great. And so it was a appeal, gets people excited, even if you don't have pictures of them. But one of the things that was really important for us early on is to really sit down and talk with Andrew Peck before he proposed this project to HWL and just get a sense of, so what does he want to actually do? So you want to change philosophy, and that's a great goal. And then there's the things that are the smaller goals that are about changing an entire discipline. And so what do you want to be able to accomplish? And so we kept breaking it down and talking about I want to change. You can't publish. You can't publish because there's not already an audience for these individuals. And so, so we need to try to publish it. It definitely needs to be out there where people can access it because it's not getting published. But it's hard to get people to actually publish it eventually because they're not teaching it. And so when we kept kind of going through this process and talking through it, we spent a lot of time, 9 months, not that that's somehow metaphorical for how long it takes to work the Humanities Project, but it was a lot of conversation and a lot of really working through what was most important. And that was really critical for us, coming from the side of being part of this team and really trying to cohere a group around this idea. And through that process, we also identified things that were really important to us, like who's our primary audience? It's going to be those individuals who are teaching at the college level and really want to change the introductory to philosophy courses. And so once we had really zoomed that down, it's we can do a lot of other things too, but we really need to make sure this is our audience, this is the kind of content we want. And so once we did that, the other side effect of spending a lot of time, the 9 months are important because in the process you get used to the idea of the people that you're working with. By the time we actually got to the building phase and we started really kind of putting the content up, figuring out how it needed to be organized, actually addressing this question about should we have images? Because we could just have text, but suddenly we had to be kind of responsive to this. Well, yeah, this is a very visual medium. We want to kind of make sure we're attracting those undergraduates. We need to have more images, and so how do we include those? But as we worked through that, it made a big difference that we had all spent that time talking through the project together and we're working as a team. We knew what everyone's role was. We had a librarian on our team, Cheryl Thomas, who's like, yeah, I actually would really like to learn a little bit more about permissions for images. And so she then became the liaison with Kevin Smith, and she helped us identify all these images, what we could use, get permissions, write the provenance, make sure that was included, which was another element that we were noticing wasn't present in other sites. We were also had an individual, B. Wallace, a graduate student who was working with us, who had never worked with Drupal before, and so was working through it and helping all of us learn how to use it. And then we were also taking into account all the kind of long-term plans that we had for this, which would really, this was just phase one, get a site up where this stuff can happen and we can put the content so that we could then go to the next phase of the project, which is really coming up with those processes for soliciting, publishing, and then getting more of this content actually out to individuals, which would be part of the next steps that we're going to see this spring and this year.
Yeah, and so one of the things we're struggling with now is putting up translation of text, because many people will not teach a text in French or Latin, so we're looking for translations. And we're also showing, I wanted to just note this image, we're also showing our students how to be savvy about the provenance of images on the web and of texts and so on. I'll just give you one simple example from our own team to sort of illustrate how I think a web resource can set a very high standard for students to understand. In this case, there's a debate about whether this is Anne Conway, and we can talk about that, but we had to go through a number of steps to obtain permission and to find it. You'll see students all the time looking at stuff on Wikipedia, of course, or Wiki Commons. Many faculty members do that, and they don't check the provenance. But in our own team, we had one case where there was a very famous frontispiece, I don't know if I can get it here, here it is. How do you like that? This very famous frontispiece, this is Isaac Newton bringing the truth from heaven, reflecting off Madame du Châtelet, kind of looks like a not really, and this, of course, is our friend Voltaire. He's not resting on his laurels, but he is wearing them. I mentioned that we need to have this on our site, and a member of our team said, oh, well, let me go find it. Where was it? I said, oh, Voltaire's Elements of the Philosophy of Newton, 1738. She went on the web, Google Books, boom. It's not there. I said, what do you mean it's not there? It's a very famous frontispiece, 1738, Voltaire. I want to talk about it on the site. No, here, look, Google Books, it's not there. Sorry, we're just going to have to move on. How could it be? So, there's some librarians here. I went to the library, and I got Voltaire's works, and I thought, oh my God, if I'm wrong about this, my reputation will be shattered. No one will listen to me again. And I flipped to page whatever it was, and it is there. So of course, Google Books, without telling you this, had a different text, same year, same title, same author, but the Amsterdam edition, not Paris. Amsterdam, well, of course, they published whatever they wanted in Amsterdam, just like that. So this was just an example in our own team of how, the web can seem just so seductive. It's all just there. Just type a few things into Google, boom, you've got it, but actually you don't. And we want our site, amongst other things, to teach students, and maybe even some colleagues, how to be savvy about the web, how to ask questions about the web, how to use the knowledge that you obtain to find, the truth lurking in there, and not to just take it to be just all, performed for you by some Google algorithm in a server in Southern California, wherever, Northern California. Is that enough?
I don't know, but we have some.
We're probably out of time.
Do we have one last thing you want to
I
say?
think a couple of things about, so I'll say the next phase of this project we're currently in is to work through documenting more of those processes that we've gone through, how we acquire, how we vet, how we then communicate online, the rigor that's gone into locating the actual source. And then we'll have actually here at Duke in April a conference around these philosophers where we're bringing people in internationally so that they can actually talk through some of the translations, bring in some teaching materials, talk through how we would teach it as well. That will actually bring in a lot more content that will then go out on the site. But we'll have another publication before then in February of some new content and another one after. So through this process, just starting to get into that cycle of doing the regular publishing for the journal. Thank you.
I know, those guys have a lot to live up to. Oh, yes. Be embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to realize that I'm next. Yeah, you are. I know. I am. Where's Casey? Somebody's making TikTok. A box? Well, it's in the box that Josh called me on the. Oh, sorry, where is it?
It's down there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm having like performance anxiety about my own talk. So next up is going to be North Carolina Jukebox with Tricky Abel and me. Now I just have to take off the minute off.
While we're waiting for our technology to get up and going, Victoria and I and our students would love to invite you to a concert on October 6th in the new Rubenstein Library in the Holstein Anderson Room. It's free, and you'll see that it connects to our course. Terry McKinney is a mountain music musician, a bluegrass, country, and gospel musician. He's been part of a musical family and a tradition bearer. And so we're having our class bring him and our Vast Connections, through our Vast Connections project, bring him to Rubenstein Library this coming Tuesday. So we would love to have any of you, or if you have friends who are interested in sort of North Carolina roots music, we'd love to have you here with us.
So we downloaded everybody's except ours. Okay, close enough. Okay. So this project, North Carolina Jukebox, is a project that is sponsored, as so many things are, by Vast Connections and by the Franklin Humanities Institute and by the ISIS program and by the Wired Lab. And this is what I was talking about with all the different roots that bring things together. So the basic principle of the project is to think about how to take historic archival materials that are otherwise inaccessible and make them accessible to the public to repatriate the music of the past. And Trudy's going to tell us a little bit more about how that works, but just to give you an overview of our project, it's a way to think about how to partner Pratt and Trinity students to work together to decide what are some of the best ways to translate this otherwise inaccessible content to the world through exhibitions. And those exhibitions are going to be both on the professional academic scholarly side and on the public side, to have them talk together about all the issues and problems that come up in trying to do such a thing, but also to learn from the contemporary musicians and artists who are out there now, including Terry McKinney, and to bring it all together as a project that does this experiment in pedagogy that includes a class, but then also a project, an exhibit, and that varies over time. So it's bringing in all these different elements from my other slides that look startlingly like this, of trying to understand all the new ways that we do work in the humanities as a result of the digital.
And we mentioned earlier briefly that there's a new initiative called Archives Alive, and it's a collaboration between Arts and Sciences and the Rubenstein Library. And this semester, 3 courses are being offered under that label. And those courses are Andrew Janiak's Gender and Philosophy, where he's getting his undergraduates involved with Project Vox, Richard Powell's Modern and Contemporary African American Art History, and then Victoria and my NC Jukebox course and project. Claire Woods will be doing a new Archives Alive course in the spring, and there'll be a few others as well. But for this class, just to give you some background, the core material that's archival that we're using in this class comes from Frank Clyde Brown. He was a professor of English in the early 20th century at Duke. He was a folklorist, and he was also the man who's in many ways responsible for the building and the design of West Campus. He played a pivotal role in establishing the North Carolina Folklore Society. He went around, it said, to 80 of 100 counties in North Carolina and collected music on wax cylinders, aluminum discs, and glass discs. And for many years, that material was kept in our library. And for a time, there might have been a good time, maybe in the early 1940s, where people could listen to the material. But then with obsolescence, we have not been able to serve the material to other users. So this project is about freeing the music from the old forms and getting students to do original research and engage both with the primary materials and the secondary materials that connect with it. We have a really neat team of students. We have 3 Pratt students and 2 students, undergraduates who are interested in computer science, and a graduate student in English, who are taking 400 pieces of music which are available to us right now and studying them. They're looking at Frank Brown's field notes and other sort of documents that he left us. And we're having the students delve in to the library's databases, the Realm Abstracts of Music Literature and the International Index to Music Periodicals. And I want to just take a moment, because it's a lightning talk, to say that already in the beginning of our term, we've had this great experience of these amazing discoveries, and I'll just share one of them. One of our students is an international student. He took an interest in the tune and the song Auld Lang Syne, which some of you will associate with New Year's. The Scottish poet Robert Burns is said to have authored it, and Sir Walter Scott was said to set the music to it. But when this student listened to the tune, he thought, gosh, this sounds familiar. The music had come with our textbook, Wayfaring Strangers, that he was trying to put his finger on it. And then he found a recording of the Korean national anthem from 1919, the national anthem that was prevalent in Korea from 1919 to 1948 when Korea was under Japanese colonization. And he realized that in the Korean movies that he had seen that were set in World War II time, that he had heard this tune because it is the tune of the Korean national anthem. So he's written this fabulous blog post about how Auld Lang Syne is now a friendship song in Chinese schools, and is also then the tune for the Korean national anthem from 1919 to 1948. So we're having these kids doing deep dives and really excited about their research.
And then on the side of converting things and putting them into an actual archive, we have a couple of goals. So one is to take the existing digitizations of a small subset, something very loud, of these songs and to create metadata for them. And that of course involves trying to think about what that metadata should be and how they should privilege different aspects of things like different editions of the songs and how they organize them. We had one student say, really, we're collecting singers as much as we're collecting the songs because we're working with this very specific archive. So there's the metadata that gets created for what we hope is going to be our NC Jukebox app, and song list. But then there's also other ways that we can explore the information that we have available to us. We had students look at the other recordings by other song catchers and put them into a shared spreadsheet in order to understand that, like how spatial and temporal dimensions might factor into their understanding of the song catcher's work. And so the students are learning how to do things like code things in latitudes and longitudes and to put them into various types of applications, but with the goal also of thinking about what that final exhibit will look like. And as I mentioned, we have two very different exhibition audiences. On the one hand, there's the Southeastern Music Librarians Association Conference that is going to be happening in October that we hope to be able to show some of this work at in the new Rubenstein. Yay. And then the other is that our own Terry McKinney has bought an old Pontiac, or rented an old Pontiac dealership out in Western North Carolina that he's turning into this very eclectic mountain music museum where we hope to be able to show some of our work as well. And there was a very exciting and somewhat inaccurate article in the Nashville Citizen Times talking about this prospect. So we're really trying to work both ends of the things here, but then ultimately also to create this greatest hits volume that we can give back to the community in Western North Carolina. Some of the descendants, in fact, are still living and very interested. They didn't even know that these recordings had been made. Gloria Houston's father is in our cover image here, and she's someone who's getting on in years and would love to see this come into fruition. So we're very excited about the questions and also issues that come in trying to do this kind of work. Thank you.
I have no idea where it is.
Yeah, no, it's here. I think it was just.
Thank you.
And next is, Jennifer Weisenfeld, Visualizing Cultures, the Shiseido Project.
Thank you. I'm going to have to work both ends of the spectrum here, but I did want to show you the website that I worked on collaboratively with MIT Live, because I do think there are things I couldn't show in screenshots. Visualizing Cultures is a website that was developed starting in 2002 as part of the Open Courseware initiative at MIT, which was to share all of the different types of courses that were being taught. But what we realized very quickly was that for people who work with images and who want to do image-driven scholarship, one of the great limitations is, of course, the number of images that you can include in your research. And this has really dogged anyone who wants to tell a visual narrative, who wants to work with images. So together with MIT, we tried to create a nexus that would partner with archives and try to create these core units that would enable new kinds of knowledge production through scholarly work on archives that were not previously accessible. And what VC did, which was so revolutionary, is they brokered Creative Commons licenses for these archives and brought them into the public domain. Of course, many of these collections are now available and have been digitized since 2002, and so there's much more public access. But the idea was to bring scholarship together with the archive and to make these image-driven scholarly units. And since it started, there's upwards of 30 units now that have been created. So it's not comprehensive coverage, it's very much a kind of drill down and focused scholarly work, and scholars took the initiative to work on images. I was asked to work. Well, actually, what I wanted to also show here is that not only is it archives of images that are high resolution, but also since then we've created parallel curricula that amplify this and bring it in, and it's actually 2 standards compliant, so teachers and students can do this kind of active history learning. And also we just launched last year a MOOC on edX called Visualizing Japan 1850s to 1930s, using this as a launch pad for that MOOC, collaboratively taught MOOC. And it's in its 2nd iteration now on edX. So if you want to enroll, it's free, please do. We had 7,000 people last year, so it was very, very exciting. Wow. Okay, so you can see it has many different interfaces here with the units. I just want to show you the unit that I helped develop. You might ask, why cosmetics? And I think it's a valid question, and why Shiseido? Shiseido is one of the longest standing and most profitable and important cosmetics companies in Japan. They've been active since the 1890s, and of course are world leader right now in cosmetics as well. I have been working with them in relation to my own research, and working with MIT, they were willing to make their entire corporate archive publicly available and digitize it for us. So it was a tremendously generous thing that they did. And so you can imagine what a great opportunity it was to work with them. But also, I think in terms of scholarly content, it was tremendously important, because oftentimes the commercial world is overlooked in terms of its innovative, creative contribution to modernity. It's sort of kind of poo-pooed on the side, particularly from our historical perspective. And it's very clear, and it's always been very clear to me, that these companies were important innovators in terms not only of manufacturing and consumer culture, but in terms of aesthetics and design and the history of modernity, and even the history of gender and women and urban history, and there's just a whole range of areas that it's tremendously important. So it's a great launch pad for thinking about culture. This is actually a custom designed platform. Now we have many more apps and things, templates that are available, but this was designed in-house by Andrew Bernstein. And it has several different interfaces to it. So you can see here that it has 3 core sections. The first one is the scholarly essay, and that has several parts, and that you can see here under the introduction. What's great about it is, what's terrific about it is that it's downloadable as a PDF. So if you want to archive it or save it, you can save it as a PDF. But also you have, in addition to the 4 sections of the core essay, you also have visual narratives. And the visual narratives are fantastic because they're under thematic rubrics. So we've tried to create these stories through thematics here. For instance, leisure and the smart set. As you can see, what it does is it enables us to think through, I don't know how to go through this, but it enables you, if you were to go to the right, I don't know how to do it on this computer, but go to the right, you can see the full expanse and all of the covers from the in-house PR magazines that the company issued all the way through the 1930s. So it gives you an opportunity not only to think about what this is saying, what kind of consumer it's constructing, but also to see the full array of the journal. And there are several journals that are in here as well. Or mobilizing for the retail force, another set of images. I wish I could, it doesn't go. Where's the arrow? Just go this one. Oh yeah, okay. Arrow, there we go. So you can just see how fabulous, and they did front and back, which is really important. When we were looking at these images, I said you need the front and the back, and if we can get the interiors later on to read this. This is the Chain Store Network journal, and what's so important about this, for instance, is this was the in-house public relations magazine that Shiseido used to communicate its marketing and advertising strategies to its entire chain store network throughout the country and throughout the empire. So you really can see how their marketing is developing in-house. So it's just really a terrific opportunity to try to do these. And these are all in high resolution images. They don't have very robust metadata because we couldn't ask them to also catalog their own collection for us. But what it does is it does provide a springboard for other people to try to do this kind of research, which is great. And then we just have image galleries here. And again, you can see here that you have all different kinds of gatherings, whether it's the journals or various things. In terms of the essay, which I really love the way this developed, I wanted to say that at the beginning, Victoria was talking about failure. The first iteration of this was a total failure. And the reason was because I was working with the VC team, and I talked to Ellen Sebring, who's the brilliant creative director for this. And she said, write the essay and do the call-outs where you want the images. So I wrote the essay and I submitted it. They laid it out. It looked horrible. It was just text and text and text and image text, and it just didn't work. And it's because we weren't thinking about web knowledge. We weren't thinking about the ways in which the web parses things and how we see different screens, and also even about what the margins could do or anything. So what she did was we said, let's scrap this. She came down here, and we worked for 3 days straight just brainstorming what the different screenshots would be, and it was tremendous fun. So you might have, for instance, the ability to look at close-ups. And also what she did was she kind of amplified and animated the layouts here, which was great. And also all of the different kind of connections. As we were talking, we thought about, well, what else is available? What other archives can we link to? So we used the margins for that, for those kinds of information. For instance, Fukuhara Shinzo, the first president, was an avid photographer, so some of the collections of his work in other places, and using the margins for this kind of work. The other thing that we tried to do was, I know it's kind of squished here on the screen, it actually looks better when it's wider, but we used the gray zones. We created these gray zones to punctuate the narrative with thematic points that were being discussed and to bring them forward. So creating these kinds of interesting moments where you say, hey, look at this is a thematic moment. And then even finding images on the web that complemented, for instance, using the Gibson girl to show some of the ways in which the kind of global notion of the modern moment. You can just get a feel for how dynamic the images are, or any of these kinds of gray areas, these gray zones that we created. Really terrific. And there's just one other thing I wanted to show. Am I done? All right, no, I can stop here. Thank you very much.
Simati Ramaswamy. And go.
Hi. Oh my gosh. Well, I noticed when Andrew was showing that frontispiece, and I'll take him to task over this over coffee, he forgot to mention what I think is the most important object in that frontispiece, which was the terrestrial globe. Because I've been obsessing about this object for many, many years, and obsessing about what happens to it when it goes outside Europe. And this project, actually, which is part of a much larger work that I'm currently involved in, focuses very much on the early arrival of the globe into India in the late 16th, early 17th century. And I've undertaken this project very much as a historian, not an art historian, but an historian interested in making available to a wider public some very complex arguments about this object as it travels around India. Now, this aspiration to do, how do I scroll it down? It's very problems, right? Okay. So this aspiration to do public humanities converged for me as well, as Jen was noting, with an important imperative to explore the promise and potentiality of image-driven historical analysis. I have proposed elsewhere that for me as a historian, that such an act of ranging between what I see as a sayable and a seeable constitutes the essence of doing pictorial history. Now, the album that I host on this website, and I'll wait for it to load while I talk. The album that I host on the website has custom adapted a digital technology called Turning the Pages to bring image and word into a complex dialectical relationship with each other in order to create or recreate some semblance of what I'm calling this act of shuttling between the sayable and the seeable. My digital album, which is that you see right here, the cover page, attempts to simulate the form of the 17th century Persianate imperial album, which is also called the Muraka in Persian. The album was described as a fine art cousin of a modern scrapbook, and it's a collection of paintings, calligraphic writings, all manner of thises and that's, that under an emperor was brought together in an imperial atelier from all manner of really fine objects that circulated in the Mughal court. These were then all loosely gathered together, placed or bound between, very luxurious, actually, very beautiful lacquer or leather covers, such as one that you see here. And then, they were bound together. Now, the art historian Ebba Hawk has noted that a muraka, or an album, is a book in form and a picture gallery in function. And in the age of digital technologies, I suggest, the muraka also becomes a highly mobile, portable, virtual picture gallery and an archive for historians like me. So I want to begin by taking you to the index view of what I have assembled here. Go down. It's not scrolling down. Okay. It's too bad. But it can give you this index view, actually gives you a sense of all the 100-odd paintings and digital images of objects that have allowed me to make this argument about the itineraries of the globe in India. So, because this is a lightning talk, I put together the 5 reasons I undertook this project. And the first of these for me was really to, that's it. What did you do? Okay. Yeah, okay. So the first thing for me as a historian was to assemble this very comprehensive archive, bringing together all the known images on this theme that are scattered across the world in various museums and collections. So that's one of the main reasons I did this, and if you scroll down, you can see all of these, and it's an easy way to access it. But I wanted to go now to the book view to begin to introduce you, and one of the things I'm going to do, because I'm sure the digital speed here is not fast enough, is to, so I want to move this over a little bit. There are all kinds of cool toys here that you can fool around with later. But what I wanted to also do this
with this project is what does it mean for a humble historian like me to become a cool collector and curator of gorgeous images. But also what it meant for me when I'm curating, and I really love all the work that the wonderful art historians amongst us do. What does it mean for me to write in a way with a larger public in mind, and not just for my academic peers? So this too has been one of my questions. And let me begin by showing you how the turning the pages technology works. It just turns the pages as we go along. And the metadata for it, you have to go and seek out and, excuse me, click the wrong button. So actually I have the wrong page for you to show that. So the metadata is here, and it's fairly, I'm using one of Jennifer's words, actually it's fairly robust metadata. And we teach together, so I'm always plagiarizing from her. So
It's good jargon.
it's good jargon, excellent jargon. So this analysis that I provided, but what I was very interested because of this image, which I'm interested in pursuing this image-driven scholarship, is that the images are actually what greet you, and you have to go and find the words, right? Because it doesn't immediately come to you that way. So this technology has actually allowed me to do this kind of image-driven analysis in a way that I found fascinating to do. I wanted to also show another very cool tool. It's a zoom in, and it actually takes you all the way to the detail. These are little tiny little paintings. I forgot to mention that. Miniature paintings with all kinds of interesting inscriptions and details on them. And the zoom in technology allows anybody who's looking at it to actually go in and look for themselves, which is amazing, right? Because these are paintings which no museum will allow you even to touch, let alone look at in great detail unless you're a specialist and have all these permissions. So I think that also is one of the advantages and real benefits of digital scholarship. Third, I was very interested in this project in reconstructing for myself, but also for the viewer, a formal viewing environment. So these paintings, as you can see, these pages follow the Persian form of turning from left to right. Many of these paintings did not circulate in public, they were not hung on walls, they're tiny paintings. So they were meant actually for a particular kind of very intimate viewing by the emperor, his closest associates, grandees of the court, and so on. So I wanted to begin to get a sense of what that meant, right? About the reach of these paintings, but also the reach of the object, namely the globe that is shown in these paintings. And I've theorized about it in the album itself. Fourth, I was very interested in what it means to recreate a lost form. In this particular case, the form of a particular kind of book. No Mughal album has survived into our times, and this is not, as you can imagine, a digitized version of an existing album. This is my album put together from many images on this theme that I've collected. So it was really my attempt to also remind the viewer, and certainly me, of alternate ways in which the book circulated in other parts of the world in different times. So it very much I was very interested in pursuing this as a line of argument as well. And fifth and not least, for me as a historian, I was using this project to really make some critical new arguments about this particular object and trying to do object history, right? So I was particularly interested in the larger work that I'm doing on the work of the globe as an object, as a model of Earth and a model for Earth and all of that. But in the course of doing this kind of object history, I got interested in another object, namely the album itself. And in assembling this, in doing this project, it's a digital virtual project, but I was spending so much time on all the material aspects of it, right? What is the size of the book? How much does it weigh? There was one point at which Michael Stocking, who's one of the person who has pioneered this particular technology, I was wondering how do I show the weight of the book, right? Because that actually is effaced in this particular kind of interface, and we could not recreate it if we wanted also the speed of the turning and all of that. I was thinking about the thickness of the page. So it was fascinating that the digital actually made me spend a lot of time thinking about the material, and that itself I've used now to theorize about the object and object history. In closing, I wanted to thank the FHI, without whom I could not have done this project. So thanks to them, and it was a fantastic workshop that the grant that they gave me allowed me to have, and many of the people who helped me think through the issues in this are assembled in the room here. I also want to thank the Arts and Sciences Research Council, which enabled a lot of the research that went into it. And I wanted to thank Edward Proctor, who's sitting in the third row, as our wonderful South Asia librarian, who first introduced me to turning the pages technology. And I went to him with this issue and I said, I want to do this. And in his very quiet voice, he said, have you considered turning the pages technology? Thank you all very much.
All right, next up. Sorry. Oh, no. Yes, yes. All right, so this is Israel's occupation in the digital age with Rebecca Stein.
Thank you, it's good to be here. And I want to remind us of the place that we started today, which was the question of what are the boundaries of this forum, Digital Humanities. And I'm a bit of an outlier in this forum, and I appreciate the chance to join you here. And that's sort of the subject of my talk, is the question of what are the parameters of what digital humanities can be. And this is, in a sense, not a digital project in the classic sense. It doesn't take a digital form, but it studies those who use digital forms. We in anthropology are navigating our relationship to the digital humanities. It's very much ongoing. But one of the ways that anthropologists are beginning to, one of many ways we're beginning to insert ourselves into this field is again through a study of the ways in which new digital technologies are being employed and put to use and changing lives and cultures. So what I want to show you today is pieces from my own project, which studies Israeli users of new media in the context of the Israeli occupation, but also to think about the ways what anthropology might have to contribute to this conversation. So this is a project, this really says it all I can say here. This is a project that I began 5 years ago. It's taken the form of one book so far and is ongoing, which is about the ways in which Israelis are using social media in the context of their occupation, by which I mean everything from how the Israeli military is employing social media as part of their wartime toolbox, how soldiers in the field use their smartphones, and how everyday Israeli users at home engage with the military occupation through social media, through digital tools. So I'm going to show you a bit of this again today, but also I really want to think about what it means to do ethnographic work with digital users. That's what our project is, that's our chief methodology, is ethnography. So for me, this engagement with the digital means hanging out, when possible, with these users. So again, state users, civilian users, soldiers, civilians, etc. All users, so I should say that everyone, the political theater of Israel's occupation is saturated with these tools. Israel, branded the startup nation, as you know, in the last 5 years, is famously literate in these new digital technologies. Palestinians' literacy has been slower, the digital infrastructure has been slower to develop, but grown markedly in the last 5 years. So all these players in the theater of military occupation are using these tools. Here we see an Israeli soldier with his smartphone facing a Palestinian protester. One of the things I'm thinking a lot about, and when I have access hanging out with the soldiers involved, is the ways in which these technologies, these new technologies, and the smartphone is a really interesting example, are not only being employed by official state bodies, but are being retooled for operational purposes in the field by soldiers. So here he's pulling out his personal smartphone as a way to survey the protester in front of him. You might be interested to know that Jewish settlers are also employing these technologies, thanks in part to a recent rabbinical ruling which allows the use of these technologies on Shabbat, so important are these technologies to the project of making certain kinds of political claims visible in the occupation. So one of the things that this project did, the first stage of this project was really very much a history of the ways in which social media was gradually becoming part of this playing field. So it was very much a historical study, and believe it or not, this in the history is a slow one. So the military first starts, Israeli military first starts using social media in 2008 as part of its encouraging to the Gaza Strip of that year. And one of the things I've been tracking is the relationship between warfare and social media. So one sees growing literacy within the military. Every successive incursion, there's been 3 into the Gaza Strip over the course of the last 10 years, you see increasing sophistication of the military where social media is concerned. They begin using social media in a kind of classic top-down aerial view mode of state speech. Here, from the vantage of the drone or the talking head mode of PR. As the project progresses, here's the team, here's the military social media team, and when I had access, I spent time with them, watching them develop their digital literacy, and it was extremely slow. Runs kind of counter to the narrative that we think we know about high-tech penetration. It took them a long time to figure out what does the military do on Facebook, right? What does it mean to put the IDF on Facebook and have a wall open to detractors? Took a very long time for them to develop their Facebook page. I was in conversation with the military as they tried to launch that. They had to figure out what do they do, how do they adopt to these new forms. How do they vernacularize so that they move out of this classic modality of state speech to something more familiar to social media users? So again, following the military as they join Facebook, and then following them through successive operations as they manage to employ these technologies with a bit more sophistication and adopt what I call a more sort of vernacular engagement with these terms. So using using the language that's part of the social media environment. This is an image from 2012. This is actually an announcement of a successful targeted assassination issued by the military in an attempt to move out of that mode of state speech into a kind of more vernacular idiom which embraces popular cultural aesthetics. So quite fascinating. Again, part of this project of learning digital literacy. So again, to return to the question of what anthropology has to offer to the conversation, I'm extremely interested. My new project is on smartphone and the kind of the new visualities that are part of the occupation landscape. And what happens when every soldier goes into the military field with a smartphone in their pocket and are employing them for operational purposes. So here's an image of a soldier doing just that. So part of the study has also been, of course, the social media output. I've been very interested in the militarized selfie. I've been following the emergence and development of this form from a kind of outline military form to its incorporation to a kind of common visual term of everyday soldier speak. Of course, not unique to Israel by any means. I know we're short on time, so I'll just end by saying I think anthropologists have a lot to offer in the field of digital humanities. It forces a kind of reconceptualization of what this thing is. Again, the digital is not the form, but in some sense the object of our analysis. And really important, I think, to be attentive, and this goes back to comments made earlier, to the highly localized ways in which these tools are being used. The selfie is a great example. The selfie is, of course, a global form, and yet it articulates in highly specific ways with the terms of the local landscape, both in this case with a history of self-portraiture, right, military self-portraiture, but also with the terms of the political landscape and the needs of the moment. Thank you.
Ours should be
While it's opening,
yeah, should I introduce myself?
yes, I'll just say, this is Digital Athens, Archaeology meets ArcGIS. And we have Tim Shea and Alina Tallman.
Hi. So our project director, Sheila Dillon, is actually leading right now for Athens Analog, to give a peek there. So I asked Alina Tallman, a recent MFA recipient from Duke, who's also our GIS specialist, to come in and speak on this as well. So just to give you a background on our project's scope and the forms and places it has taken us. Athens is one of these culturally rich centers, the hubs of Western culture, that in recent trends in recent scholarship have been to move away from studying Athens. So more and more archaeological excavations are taking place in northern Greece, Bulgaria, Albania. It's easier to get permits here, but it's also these places are understudied, so scholars are moving to these understudied places, which is great. When we look at Athens, though, we ask ourselves, okay, so here's this overstudied place where most of the ancient literature from ancient Greece comes from this place. And yet we ask very basic questions like, what did ancient Athens look like? And it's impossible to answer. There is no complete plan of ancient Athens that has been excavated by the Greek government or the other excavations that have taken place in Athens. So we actually have no idea what ancient Athens looks like, which is great because that's the adventure that we're embarking upon. So what we've started to do at Duke with this very simple question of what did ancient Athens look like is begin a historical GIS project. So a group of graduate students, including myself, I'm a PhD candidate in Art Art Histories and Visual Studies here at Duke, and undergraduates in a range of fields. Right now we have 2 computer scientists and a history major working with us, which is a great combo to have. They've all been given a crash course in ArcGIS and QGIS. So we've given them the tools to collect spatial data from a range of places and bring them together. At the same time, we're working with a team in Athens. One is Bruce Hartzler. He is the archivist of the Agora excavations. It's the longest ongoing American excavation in Athens, and it's also the largest archaeological park in Athens. So he has given us a slew of survey data, anything at his disposal he's made freely available to us, and is really excited about collaborating with our project. The other 2 people are Lita Kostaki, who she's an archivist for the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. Her dissertation, she mapped every excavated patch of road in Athens. So she is a welcome addition to our team, as well as Anita Theoharaki, who mapped every excavated wall fragment of the ancient city wall of Athens. So we have some people who are really, really well versed with the excavated remains of Athens, and we're trying to help bring these different people together. So, our material, what we've been doing in the Wired Lab here at Duke, is using the material that's easily available to us here in America with undergraduates who can at most read English right now, and we're not forced enough to look at German or French excavations or the Greek excavations yet. So we've mainly looked at aerial photography. So I'm in the left corner. These are images from 1957 and 1931. Athens itself has really exploded since the 1950s. Up until then, much of modern Athens, the city of Athens, was rather rural. Like there wasn't much urban development until relatively recently. So historical photos are a great, aerial photos are a great source of information for us. Historical maps. So because this place has been such a focal point for scholars, well into the beginning in the 1800s, German and French scholars actually mapped antiquities when they found them. So historical maps often have the remains of archaeological sites placed on them. And so we've been georeferencing some of these historical maps just as a baseline for areas outside of excavated areas. The last thing, and kind of the one we focus most on, are published excavated plans. So these are mostly from the American excavation of the Agora, and have been made freely available to us by this Bruce Hartzler, our collaborator there. And what we've been doing is georeferencing excavated plans, so giving them a spatial reference to the Earth, the actual Earth, so that anyone who can bring it into their GIS platform and it is immediately usable. But in addition to that, we've been creating vector layers based on them. So once plans are brought into GIS, you can create a vector layer. So a raster layer is made of pixels. It's what most JPEGs and visual images that you look at are raster data. Vector data is great because you can assign metadata to it more easily. You can say, this is a Roman building, view it with all other Roman buildings. Here's a Greek building. I want to visualize it with all other Greek buildings from this century. So it's easier to organize your data and make it more accessible and usable to people trying to view your data. All right, so over the past 2 semesters, we've been just aggregating as much data as possible, georeferencing all these types of images and vectorizing them. But the question has been, how do we visualize this for the public? How do we make this data as accessible as possible to students and scholars who want to visualize what ancient Athens looked like in relation to the modern city? So we've been experimenting as of late with Mapbox. And to give us a brief introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Alina, who's done some really amazing work with our data. How do we...
It's a recurring theme.
There he is. Sorry about that.
Hello. So we started using Mapbox as an experiment to see if this would work well for us. And what I really love about Mapbox is it treats the design on a level along with functionality. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes with GIS work, the cartographic design is kind of seen as an afterthought, and Mapbox is very much a design-based program, but it also has a lot of functionality. And what they've done is, they have these really beautiful base maps. When this loads, you'll see, that are based on OpenStreetMap data and are all customizable. This is not loading very fast, actually. Which you can load your georeference data into. And then using JavaScript coding, you can make this interactive. So this is a pretty simple example of what you can do. Where you can choose what eras you'd like to see. And these are those vectors. These are traced from the building plans. And so these are just, in this example, you just choose them this way, but you could also create like a time slider and animations and things like that. And then another thing that you can do is you can access more information by clicking on individual features, and you can embed images or have that linked to somewhere else or have the video or the text. So it's just the beginning, but it's a good start, I think.
Yeah, the next plan is to move outside of the Agora. So we just focused on this set of material first. The data was readily available, and it was all published in English. But I think the next phase is to move out to the areas just outside of the Agora and kind of inch our way out in collaboration with our colleagues in Athens. So thank you very much.
So just while we're setting up, I'll just say I experimented with my coordinates in Mapbox, and it shifted all of them from continental Europe into the Atlantic Ocean. A major fail, my fault, I'm sure.
Coordinate reference system.
And so next up is early medieval networks with Claire Woods.
project has really built on my own research on early medieval Carolingian, one author in particular, and I put this up to show the kind of network I'm actually moving on from. This was a starting point for me, and is a starting point, I think, for many early medievalists. So I'm a Latinist, and I have spent a good portion of my career thinking about the man in the middle, Rabanus Maurus, working on a sermon collection that he compiled in the 820s. And what I wanted to do was actually think bigger. And I was particularly inspired by a project that calls itself about medieval networks, but tends to stick to this notion of one individual and his network. And so what we tend to get, what I'm showing you here is a diagram that was made in Gephi to show one man's correspondence network. So we're using a letter collection to create one network. It's egocentric. And what tends to happen, I think, with scholars in my field trying to do this is that we make this kind of network, or we make several of them, and maybe they intersect at a couple of points. But what we're not really exploring is the periphery and everything else that's happening. And I wanted to do something more dynamic and also try to use different kinds of sources to try to make what I've been thinking of as a total network. And I have tried to get students involved with this, my graduates. The material is often in Latin, so there is a sort of a need to be able to read Latin to help me with it, but I've had graduate students help me in some seminars think about manuscript distribution, which is what I'm exploring more now. So what I'm showing here is the sort of work I've been trying. This is using Tableau to show, so what you'll notice with this is that there's no chronology, there's no timeline of when he knew these people, and those relationships shift and change over time. There's also no geospatial awareness in that. So what I did here is I'm staying still with one man. I've moved on from thinking about just one scholar. Background music. So what I've done here is take one scholar and a range of his works to try to see if that will give us a different view of network. And what I'm very keen to do, I'm using different sources, so letter collections are a part of the kind of range of things we can use to do this, but I'm also interested in thinking about known student-teacher relationships, patronage collections, gift exchange, where we know that kind of connection has been made. I'm also, and this is what this is, and what I'm focusing on most now, I'm wanting to use contemporary manuscripts or near-contemporary manuscript copies of the sorts of texts being written by authors in my period, to see if we can see in the way those circulate where they were made, where their earliest homes were, see if we can map that and find connections there in terms of who's interested in the work of one particular author, in this case Rabanus, my man Rabanus. And what emerged here, this is a small range, he's one of the most prolific authors of my period, but what I've done is I've taken all the extant manuscripts of manuscript copies of a range of his works, I've color-coded them on this map, and I've tried to geolocate them. These are all 9th century manuscripts, geolocated by where they were copied or where they were first commissioned for, their earliest home, as much as that is possible to do. And we can go into the problems with this kind of, with trying to date and place manuscripts at this period, but it's very fuzzy data, and either we throw it out or we try to work with it. And something that I think Caroline mentioned about the beauty of working digitally, trying to visualize, working with what we've got, is that actually new research questions open up for you, and problems that actually become very interesting if you engage with them. Try to use the material you have. So what we've got here already, you're seeing for his works, for the works of one man, certain places pop out. So you see those bigger pies there that have multiple copies, or have copies of several of his works. And what I'm trying to do is not just take one kind of data, like manuscripts, information here, but layer it with other sorts of information. And what I want to do is stop using Tableau and perhaps move into something newer called NodeGoat, which I think will let me layer different sorts of information together so that I won't just show you manuscripts. I'll show you one of the things that's emerging from this picture, where you see those bigger pieces of pie or bigger cheeses are actually part of the confraternal, monastic confraternal network to which Fulda belonged. My man was based at Fulda. The places that are in confraternal connection with Fulda have more of his manuscripts. And you might think, well, yeah, of course they do. But actually there's been an argument by scholars in my field that that is not the case, that these things didn't circulate by confraternity. So this is actually showing something very interesting. And by layering different pieces of information like that, we're getting at deeper research questions, just in a slightly different way. This is where I'm moving on to now. This is different texts by different authors, right? So I'm moving from one author to many, which is going to help me get at a more total network. And what I've done here is I've crunched some data which showed me, again by visualization, that's what enabled me to pick this particular path into my project next, that one of the most popular books produced in the Carolingian period, the 8th and 9th centuries, are commentaries on the epistles, the biblical epistles. They were the most popular biblical commentaries for my period and indeed for the entire Middle Ages. And that emerges as a kind of really robust, I don't want to use that word now, robust, when you look at the data. And I chose them because we have bigger data. And for those of you working on more modern projects, you have big data. I have sort of enough data, but this was but this allowed me to look at the spread of biblical commentaries, again trying to place them. These are just the earliest manuscripts, the 9th century, and you can see that Tableau lets you select the century, and they're geolocated there. You'll see this big unknown piece of pie, or big pie there of unknown manuscripts. That's my problem, I'm not able to locate them. And I've shoved them in Western Brittany. So you have to choose, but I didn't want to leave them off. But what's already starting to emerge, and again, this goes back to Caroline's point about new research questions, the visualization is guiding my research, not just to make the network project, to build the network, however I'm going to do that, but also, if you look at the people writing in the 840s and 850s, you see that, and this only emerges when you map the material, the data, you can see that they're transmitted in different regions. So one of my research questions is, why do we have so many commentaries being written on the epistles? And then you look at how they're circulating, and you realize that that probably you need more of them because they're not immediately publicized empire-wide. I mean, and I think this kind of diagram has some very interesting things to tell us about circulation. And another, just to finish, about one of the other sources of information I want to layer in, are the road and route and river networks by which people travel. I think it's fundamentally important to think about that it's not just Amazon delivers it, but somebody has to carry those manuscripts across the empire. And how do they do that? And where do they stop on the way? And who do they talk to? And this is information that's lost to us now. But we might be able to see, like breadcrumbs almost, in where the text gets picked up, or where there's interest in the text, the routes that were taken. So that's another layer, and we have that kind of digital roadmap for the Roman world. It's a beautiful website coming out of Stanford now, called, I've forgotten what it's called. Orbis, right. That's wonderful to play with. You can map any route across the empire, and you can plan how long it will take you with an army, on horseback. You can go by the quickest route, or it's dangerous. You can be lost for hours in planning your route across the Roman Empire. But I think for the early medieval period, that system, that route system is still very much operative. So trying to kind of bring that tool in and think about it to help with my network questions is going to be one of the ways forward. And my time is probably up. I'm okay. Okay, well, I want coffee.
So apparently I've instilled the fear of the gods into all of you because we're actually ahead of schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up Maurizio Forte, who's going to talk about digital archaeology from the field to virtual reality. This is probably a good thing to check in on before we have a break.
Thank you. I decided, because the topic is very general on digital humanities, to be focused on the methodology rather than a single project. So trying to explain what we do in the lab with students, we do in the field, we do in several places of the world. So our lab is in the Bay 10, and there are many students, some affiliated, some friends that we have here that we are very happy that they're all around archaeology, and we have a very productive discussion because, of course, it's a very interdisciplinary field, so we need a very large network of people. And also, I have to say that the interdisciplinary grants at Duke helped a lot because we have different students with different backgrounds that this is. You have seen before, it's a plus, it's additional value for all. So first of all, I have to explain where we collect data, because when you see, we are very relaxed sometimes in the lab, but we spend several months in data recording in several countries. We use differential GPS, laser scanners, drones, remote sensing data, optical system, and more. To give you an example, that this was a work I done a long time ago in China, but it's important to notice that this scanner, and at the time, was the only way to document. This is the one of the gate of the Chang'an city in Xi'an, near Xi'an. So what you see here is lost forever. So most of the structures that we record, they are gone. And this is important. This is another Western Han Dynasty. Was a top 15 discovered in China. It's gone as well. So its old paintings are gone, and they construct another building over this one. This is the team working on the Imperial Mausoleum in China. There were substantially a map from for our perspective, in the sense that we didn't have a differential, very detailed differential analysis on the top. There are 12 mausoleums watched in Xi'an, were all recorded by differential GPS and remote sensing as well. Tool we use, this is a, I want also to give you some statistical data about digital product, digital recording. A few years ago, with an optical scanner, we were able to shoot with 1,000 points per second. The new generation scanner are able to generate 1,000,000 points per second. So this point out a big problem for this community. Not just me, but this community. What to do with data. And I started, I think, an important discussion with the library. I think the library should be the place where we share our knowledge for the future generation. This is my cultural manifesto. I want to say in public, because I truly believe that if the data stay in my lab, they're gonna die. Okay, you're gonna use it. Nobody can use it, except for a few scholars. That's not, it's not, I think, a great performance for if we compare how much money, effort, people, Brian power, so we invest. Okay, so this is important also for And I think future discussion about data format, data standardization, which is actually very cross-disciplinary. So, because we generate different kinds of data, and we're not ready for that, maybe. So we are in Egyptian tune here. You know, Egypt now is not an easy country today, but we work a lot in the past, and then we collect data, but we don't know what to do with this because there are now formats we are not anymore standardized for the software we use now, for example. And 7-year project in Turkey. This is Çatalhöyük, one of course first city in the world, 7,000 BCE more or less. Here we bring students with digital camera, laser scanners, and we have started right now a repository here at Duke where we have standardized at least the digital workflow, so the data come from the field, they go to the lab, they are post-processed, and they are available for Oculus Rift or other virtual reality system, but also for the dive. So the great news is that we can standardize data from a very cheap device, $200, up to $1 million or $5 million of immersive devices. The same kind of model, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. This is very important because we can use and reuse the model. We use models for education, we use for research, so we have a lot of students engaged in this, and I think that they are all open. So everybody is welcome to visit the lab. We had new visitors recently, but we like, of course, to have more discussion about. We started with kite, you know, this a few years ago, it's just kite. Kite balloons is kind of, you have to be creative, you know, when you don't have enough money, then you have to. So now we have drones, so that's why this is happening. So this, we move to another kind of device, and then we shoot a lot. In the summer, this is Vulci, which is a Roman and Etruscan city. In Vulci, we had the chance to collect almost 5,000 aerial photographies, aerial photos in 3-4 weeks. And this is the power of a tool, but also the combination of high technologies and team of students. Teamwork is very important as well, but all the projects I think can show very much. You see here the rural landscape that you have the only issue here are cows, that because they have the visibility of the ecological landscape, you know, you can deal with it. Cows is not very easy in this park. But beside that, we were able to create a photogrammetric plane of this site. It's also a public park with an accuracy of 2 centimeters, so something nobody has realized before. So what I want to highlight today is the fact that archaeology is a very important experimental field for new technologies, because we can integrate different tools, devices, software, hardware. Nobody usually can in the same place at the same time. So I'm not because I'm archaeology, because I can easily demonstrate that. In fact, we got sponsorship from corporation. Why? Well, because they know that we are very critical. And we can say, look, this device doesn't work very much. So Trimble gave us a lot of support here, but when we told them, look, your scanners are really crap. They said, well, at that point, we're going to buy another company. In fact, Faro Technology now is producing from LA the scanners for another corporation, which is Trimble. Simple. I didn't say that technology was able to do so much, but I'm saying that we were able to say something that was really useful also for a commercial market, okay? And let me conclude with a very nice discovery from this summer. I mean, it was the most satisfying discovery for us, and thanks to Nevio, which is somewhere here, our postdoc. And this is a site in Turkey, Zavravetos. So this site is really in the middle of nowhere, southern Turkey. And we collected here over 1,000 photos, aerial photos by the drone. And with the Turkish team, we recorded all the data. You see that it looks that difficult here to analyze what you're seeing, because there are some natural stones, some built material and so on. Well, we discovered the Roman theater. And this is something very tangible, because this flight was, actually the effort was great to bring all the equipment there. But after that, in 2 hours, we got this. So it was post-process, of course, was shared with the Turkish team, and I've seen the faces of the director of the coin, you say, oh, this is something we never seen before, because this side is a map. This side is a map. There's no map. There are very few sketches, and that's it. We're going to start a new excavation campaign maybe next year, but the most important thing for us is that non-invasive technology. We didn't excavate here. We didn't bring a super expensive equipment. We are just 2 people, and we made this. I think this is something, even it's not a reconstruction in this case, but it can tell us more about what to do when we have the right approach and also the right strategy. And you see from the drones that you can see a lot of data. We use, we integrate GPRs here at generator, and you have an idea of this. New cities we have discovered, actually new in the sense that it's not yet visible in the archaeological site of Vulci, and the students you see are doing the same things that the team has shown before. So we are vectorizing actually the georadar interpretation. What you see, the georadar is a penetrating radar, can see, of course, the structures, walls, foundation walls are completely unknown. So the next plan for the next season will be to excavate and in order to validate the predictive models we have generated by georadar, by drones, and by non-invasive technologies, in order to open a new part of the park to the public. This is an agreement with the local superintendent. Have an idea of some. And let me conclude with the not excavation and another. I'm sorry. This is again Vulci. This tomb was discovered during a global education program, so we were lucky to be there. After 25 years, they found a virgin Etruscan tomb. So the student came to the tomb, and in 1 hour, shooting with the camera, they made a model you see here. You can find the story in Duke today. So it was and here, the last product we released for the Italian city, which is actually my own city, Reggio Emilia, in the north of Italy. This is a public virtual museum, was donated to the city in the end of May. And it's a digital product made in Duke, made by Duke, designed by Duke. And it's public, it's open to the visitor, and see that there's the LiDAR data, and here the construction of the Roman city. There are 7 installations and several reconstruction. And I have to say that the second day, based on several technology I have not time to discuss, but Oculus is one of them. And second day after the opening, they sold 900 tickets, which is actually what they usually sell in 6 months.
Wow.
And to conclude, this is something you can see even in our lab or the DHI. This is the virtual reconstruction archaeological excavation. You can go with a 3D controller and can browse every single layer, and like in a real, in a sort of empirical world, but in this case, in the virtual world. I like to emphasize that the software here, which is actually a software designed in Unity 3D, but that software was written by an undergrad student, Emmanuel, which is not here, but I think it's supported by Bus Connection. I think it's in line with what you have already said. Okay, thank you.
Well, we're going to take a coffee break. I hope there's coffee. Is there coffee here? There are definitely things that are beverages on the other side of that wall. So we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes and we continue on with a lot of other exciting topics.
Thank you. name is Wen Guang, who is considered one of the pioneers of independent Chinese documentary films. And so they went to rural part of China and interviewed elderlies in the villages, asking them about their memory of the history of the recent past of China, which is mostly after 1949 to 1976. And they asked, what did you remember? What did you experience? What can you tell us about it? And the people who interview them, these filmmakers, are often sort of remotely related with the interviewer, meaning that their parents or their grandparents used to be living in that village. So it is a little bit easier for them to go to those villages, approaching these villagers and ask them to tell them stories. So we often say that we hear the Chinese government present official histories, right? We always say this is not true. This is not the true picture of what Chinese people experienced after 1949. But we didn't actually have a lot of original materials to tell us what is the real story. So these are a wonderful projects collecting these oral history from these villagers, from these peasants who tell them their own experiences. Okay. The filmmakers started their projects in 2010, okay, and it is still ongoing. They're still doing their projects. And what is included in the collection, I mentioned these are interview footages, but also beyond that, we also have spreadsheets from the filmmakers that they submitted to us, or they gave it to us, with very preliminary metadata, or very basic information as who the person that they interviewed, where is the interview. We have these basic information. And we also have the blog, access to their blog post that's in Chinese that we can still access. And in the past May, they also gave me in Word document format that every blog post, they believe it's a collection of all the blog posts since 2010. Besides, they also gave us the email transactions among the filmmakers, also sort of from 2010. So we really have lots of materials here. So how did that come to Duke? So in 2012, Professor Guo Junhong invited Wen Guan and some of the younger filmmakers to come to Duke to do a presentation or screening of their films. And so I got involved into talking with these filmmakers as we were talking about something else. Then I say, have you ever thought about, you have a lot of things, have you ever thought of long-term preservation, how are you gonna deal with that? And somehow we started to say, will you be considering donating some of these raw materials to the library? And they immediately loved that idea. I was actually surprised that they loved this idea so quickly. And at that time, I wasn't expecting that much material. I was expecting maybe a few hundred, interviews from the filmmakers. And then we finally got that, and it was more than 1,000 things, and plus these blog posts and emails. It's really overwhelming, actually, for us. So we started the project basically since 2014, actually. We got the material in 2013, but didn't actually start doing that until last year, until 2014. And we started to process. We do have a web page I want to show you. And also last year, we invited these filmmakers to come again to do a two-week residency. I remember it's around this time last year that these filmmakers in the same place presented, told us more about their project. So we do have these things. And these give you a very brief introduction to the project, since it's just getting started. And I told you, we didn't realize we are having these much materials to process, so we decided earlier this year to apply for a grant that helped us to process these materials. We were lucky enough, we did receive the grant, and on track. So this is one. So we did, because he is the leader of the project, we did give him a little bit more introduction on this page. And the library actually purchased all his films. So if you're interested in the kind of work he's doing, so we do have his films here. Okay. And when we invited them last year to come over to do a residency, we also asked them their opinions about how do they want these things to be processed, to be observed, to be presented. So I saw this project is also unique in a way is we have this project actually started from a professor or faculty who brought these filmmakers over, who helped us to acquire these wonderful donations as a collection to the library, where we continue to include the filmmakers, continue to include the professors in the describing these organization, in the processing of the materials. So I thought it was a very unique project that we have all the shareholders continue to be involved in that. And so when they were over last year, around this time in October, I believe, and we had a lot of conversations to say that we actually have a contradictory idea sometimes. How do you want me? I have started to think about organizing everything by filmmakers. I'm a librarian, so starting from organizing everything by authors, right? And they immediately rejected my suggestion and said, no. We are not that important. These people being interviewed are the most important. We want everything around them. Which immediately, I got it. I say, thank you, I got it. And also, but this is also then the professor would say, oh, that's a good idea. So when you are finally doing the digital collection, our final product, which is not part of the grant only support the processing of these materials and including creating lots and lots of metadata, and majority of these most important fields of these metadata are going to be bilingual, meaning Chinese and English, because we want these wonderful collections to be not only be available outside China, but one day they will be even available for people within China, because some of these things are still not allowed. At least they cannot show their film in China freely. So I want these things to be bilingual so people can find and can use them. And so the professors immediately put in another idea, saying when you are generating this digital collection, can you include all sorts of tools that he immediately think about? What about map? What about this? What about that? Well, this is so exciting. I was chatting with my boss during the break saying, we are early in our stage, so that means we have a lot of more tools to try and to use, to consider. So I hope bringing the project to you today will help you generate some more interest on Duke campus, that you can think about this collection, recommending tools to us, or even include some of the materials in your project or help us do our project. So let me show you, we did do a pilot thing. Let me show you. This is not a digital collection. This is what we call a collection guide, meaning it's just a list of things. But if a Chinese history class wants to use that, the professor can already embed this video in the course site, so they can starting to be used. And I hope more people using it have more understanding of these materials and help us generating a more vibrant, more functional database in the future. So it's very interesting. And right now, these 51 videos has subtitles bilingual. I didn't realize it is lost. Yes. So, by the way, the dialogues are in Chinese dialects that 99%, I'm native Chinese, but 99% of these dialogues I couldn't understand. So it's a challenging project. If the filmmakers do not provide transcripts, it's very challenging for me to understand, actually. Okay, so it's really a collaboration between library, filmmaker, students, faculties here on campus. Okay.
All right, next up, we're going to hear about Painting the Apostles, a case study in the lives of things, with Mark Olson, Mariano Tepper, and Caroline Rosales.
Interpretive dance, please.
I'm going to move away.
All right.
You can full
Okay, I'm Caroline. We happen to have at Duke University a very remarkable collection of medieval. Oh yeah, got it. Okay, we have at Duke a remarkable collection of medieval sculpture. 1991, I published a printed catalog of this sculpture, but that was another world. And now, we have begun to use digital tools to engage actively in compensating for the fact that when we see sculpture in this kind of installation, it is decontextualized, desacralized, deracinated, etc., right? It is completely floating on walls, even though they are beautiful blue walls now instead of white walls. The fact is that, of course, all these bits and pieces, all this flotsam and jetsam, was part of something else. It was part of a church portal, it was on the facade, it was on an altar. It meant something because it was somewhere. So for a few years now, with my wonderful colleague, Mark Olson, we have been engaged in a multiple-pronged effort which we have cast under the rubric of the lives of things. And this has involved both teaching, because we co-taught a course initially, and it has involved extended research projects. Now, our current enterprise, and I'm going to step away in just a moment and pass the baton, as it were, to these gentlemen, is on these 4 apostles. This is part of a larger group of 9 figures that are all in American museums dispersed around the East Coast. We have 4 of them, and they're very fine Romanesque sculpture. But here's the thing, right? We just see them as floating objects. We see them outside of any architectural context. They would have been on the facade of a church, and we see them in stone color. Whereas all medieval sculpture, like ancient sculpture, was brightly painted. So this project, and now it's over to Mark, yes, okay, so brightly painted like this, for example, right, or even more brightly painted, as you'll see in a moment. So I'm now going to pass the story over to Mark and Mariano, who are going to take it from here.
So this project is part of a multi-semester project, and one of the challenges that we've always faced is how to dip in and out of classes. So we use classes as a kind of driver to move this forward, but we see the project as extending across multiple semesters. So after Carol and I taught a coursework in which we talked about how we might think about about these objects in the museum context. Mariano and I then taught a technically oriented class. It was the first of its kind to be crosses between electrical and computer engineering and art history and visual studies, where we were teaching students everything from the history of perspectival looking, from Brunelleschi to Masaccio, and all the way up. And then in the same class, we then transitioned from that to the mathematics of 2D to 3D matrix transformations and camera modeling in three-dimensional worlds. So we had computer scientists sitting next to our historians, side-by-side coding, also side-by-side learning the history of these objects. And what the students were able to come up with was some pretty interesting prototypes. This is one of the originals dealing with the apostles. So we knew that they were colored, and we thought, well, how could we deal with these in their original context, in the museum context as they are now, but develop something that would allow some interactivity to it. And so Nan and Max and Lex was in liberal studies, Max is the visual studies, media studies PhD, and Nan was in computer science, came together, and this was their initial prototype of an application that would use light to paint on the apostles in the museum. So what happened after that, we went through many iterations and began to think more and more about the project and what kinds of technologies would work. We moved out of the class zone and into the Basque Connections mode, where we had our graduate students and faculty working together to do everything from explore, I don't have a slide of this, but explore how this projection would work on a tiki statue from Home Depot. And then begin to do the scholarly work around writing stories about these different apostles and the pigments that were available from medieval scholars. So we ended up developing a prototype using, I don't think that's all going to fit in one slide. I'll turn it over to you to say a little bit about the technologies.
Okay. So the prototype that we developed is basically a web server. So it's a website. The iPads are just loading the website and are controlling the interactive display through this website. So the web server is just a Python Cherry Pie server. It's installed on a Raspberry Pi, which is a very small computer, but very powerful, very tiny, that we can put on top of the projector so it doesn't interfere with the museum activities. And the website runs using basically JS, and in particular Paper.js, and all the design part of the website is running on CSS.
And so, oops, why did I have? All right, scroll back down. So we built this kind of platform. And I'll try one more time. Otherwise, it's going back to the beginning. I just want to get to our interface a little bit. So we developed an iPad interface, which I'm not sure we're going to get to. Let me try this way. All right, so we developed an iPad interface that is using the technologies that Mariano mentioned. And so this is actually installed at the Nasher as of this afternoon. I apologize for missing some of the earlier presentations, but we're debuting this on Sunday, and we had to get it up and running. So we have two iPads right in front of the statues. They're still mounted as in the picture that Carolyn showed at the beginning. But in front there are these two iPads, and when you approach the iPads and touch them, it turns off the lights and turns on our projector and allows you to interactively paint these statues. And as you do, the light is projected on them of the colors that you're choosing. And I'm just going to give up on this working. And as you do that, you then pulled up some scholarly information that Alexander Dodson and Max Sonaleski pulled together around the history of medieval pigments. So as you choose your greens, your yellows, your browns, your blues, you get to read about the stories of these pigments while you continue to paint. And And so here's a screenshot then of how they are painted in the museum. It's not the best photograph, colors aren't doing justice to it, but this is radically different, as you can tell from the bare stone projection. So we're using projection mapping and mapping these colors, and every color you see is selectable by the user. So we've had some fantastic responses to it so far. And my favorite quote is at the end of this talk, where some kid at the National Yankee Stadium walked into the gallery and said, "Whoa, those are painted, that's cool," right? So we have these statues, and we actually have some surveillance footage from the museum where people walked by them, not even really looking at them. And here we have a moment where, at the very least, they're arrested in their tracks and are figuring out, at the very least, they leave knowing that medieval statues were painted. If they engage with the app, they'll learn more. We have lots of people to thank, including Marianne Bortle, who's here, and all the staff at the Nasher, and we have a big team of students over the years who've been working on this. So we encourage you Sunday, Nasher at 10 opening is starting at 1:30 noon.
We open at noon.
Open at noon.
And the you guys are doing a Ned Talk.
A Ned Talk at 1:30.
Right.
We have actually keynote. And then there's a debut at 2:30, a demo of the application. So come by, it'll be running. It's actually up and running now, fingers crossed. So drop on by and take a look. Thank you.
All right, next. Okay, wait.
Yes.
Sorry. That's a terrible sense of direction, they all go together. Okay. I'll stop. Timer ended now. Okay, so next up is going to be Veo Veo, Children at Play, with Raquel Sabater Prado.
Thank you. So, I teach design and animation classes up in the art department, and this is a personal project that I wanted to show you. And to start, I'm going to show you actually a video, a 1-minute video, so I could almost finish my presentation after that. But I'll explain a little bit more about the project. Okay, so when I'm talking about games, let me see if I found it. Where is it? When I'm talking about games, where's the game? I don't use much PowerPoints, you can see. So when I'm talking about games, I'm talking about traditional and popular games that are part of our cultural heritage, but and often has been passed from generations to generations. Now, these games have an enormous directed value. They, for example, they have more with motor and coordination development, plus with cooperation and bonding, but it also, they have been lost. Most of them a lot of them are being lost due to the loss of the space, because of urban development, because of a sedentary lifestyle, because of this pressure with the schools and this competition that we have, a lot of extracurricular activities. So in light of this, the goals of the OVEO are to promote an active and social lifestyle that can be presented to parents and also educators with a friendly database, classification that's user-friendly and also can be presented in an aesthetically and engaging way. It can also, one of the goals would be to create an archive of this collective knowledge through crowdsourcing from international user base. Can also facilitate cultural exchange and integration, and uncover and also encourage and illustrate share of similar customs from different cultures. So my interest of this project was specifically because I have little kids and I started playing with games, and I realized that I forgot a lot of the ones that I played when I was little. So my first reaction was to go online, find this game, and this experience was very frustrated. Most of the websites are very visually poor, and as a designer that hurts my eyes. They also they lack a professionalism, the structure, and a lot of the games don't even have visuals to help you understand the game. So, this project doesn't go very well. So this traditional, you can see here, this is an example of some websites that I only a few of the websites that I've been searching online, and to create an application that I think will be successful, most of them are missing a lot of this information. And I'm gonna go now and show you the website that is not fully functional. It's not fully functional yet, but hopefully it will be live at the end of the semester. So. Because of this traditional topic, I try to create visuals that have an organic and earthy look, but also using fonts that are sensory fonts for the ones that don't understand what that is. Like a lot of these fonts have this like kind of end of the letter has an embellishment. So to try to kind of bring a little bit of a more modern look and trying to combine both styles, and then also trying to reflect this mood with the logo. Where I use the word veo veo, which in Spanish means I see and see, and it's actually a game that we used to play, and it's very similar to the I Spy with my eagle eye. And the idea is to connect it also with two children that are not playing a specific game, and they are connected to the text in a dynamic way to represent the importance of the games. So the way I created this project was using WordPress, and most of you have used it for your own research projects. And because that way I have flexibility to extend it to scale it if needed, which I would like to do in a second phase. Something that I created a theme. So I created a theme from scratch, so I could have complete manipulation of the visual. But also use plugins, for example, to create a classification of the games. And by the way, so you know, to create this also all style, it's supposed to be a Polaroid photo which completely disappears on the projector. This has been tested to use, and it's still a little bit more work, but it's responsive, so it should work in mobile phone tablets, but it doesn't work right now on projectors. The way the classification works, you could select, for example, a game that has equipment, and a game that has no lyrics. So the final results are found on the right, and I could select, for example, this game that I played a lot when I was little. So when you're clicking on the game, you can find information on the game, where it's played, the goal, but also if the user had been able to put history about the game, you could also find variations of the game, and visual elements like video or photos. And if interested, of course, the idea of creating a conversations about these nostalgic memories that we have. So this could be a way of starting. And if a user is interested in, of course, printing and saving in an interesting format that could be used, email, but also save it forgot to log in, excuse me. I hope it works. see that it's still in progress. So I have, let me go back to the games. So I could save it to my collection where you could create your own, like if some of you use Pinterest, you could create your own folders and save the games there, which I found it very useful, especially for educators, so they could use such a collection to use on their first grade course, third grade course, etc. So when going to my collection, you can have, again, folders with the games that the user has selected, whether you can also edit it and remove them. The other game page, which has, I will also use a plugin for this. So the idea is to use a form so you can have a database that's consistent and the way also that the games look on the side. Some of these inputs are mandatory, which will be very important for the search field, and then also the possibility to upload multiple images, video, audio, history if not, etc. And also a gallery where the photos uploaded by the user could be shown, and this would be also a way to access the games to this website. There's a second, I don't think, how many? 1 minute? 1 minute. Yeah, perfect. So on the second phase of this project, something that I would like to do is have it for a second language for Spanish. This is something, traditional games is something that is used in the curriculum and sports for sports classes for actually schools in Spain, but also have a geographical map where you can visualize the origins of these games. And what I found also fascinating is that you can show the connections between different cultures and places. That's it. Thank you.
All right, so next up, we're going to hear about things to think with, weird DH, data and experimental media theory. And this is with Mark Olson, Luke Caldwell, and Shane Denson.
All right, so we have a card on this over this. Great. Okay, well, wanted to put on my other hat, my more speculative hat, and talk a little bit about the S1 lab, the S-1 lab. It's a lab that, digital lab that Mark Hansen and I founded probably about 5 years ago, that's designed around thinking about media and mediality from, I think, a fairly high-level theoretical perspective. And then beginning to think about how we can leverage new technologies to help us enter into some of the theoretical questions that are kind of driving the field. And so we're very interested in how technologies of data capture, biometric technologies, these kinds of things have become more ubiquitous. And rather than simply studying them from afar, we've begun to use them as things to think with, teaching ourselves how to leverage some of these technologies or versions of the technologies or simulations of the technologies with the idea that we can then kind of freeze open some of the thorny methodological and theoretical issues that we've been grappling with. And so we have today a presentation on one of our projects. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shane and Luke and let them tell you.
All right, I'm going to talk more about the what, and Shane's going to unpack, like, what does it mean? So I'm here to talk about evangelize this little guy.
You come closer to the mic.
I think you're okay, but.
It's recording. It's
yeah,
recording.
I was watching the stream, and that was rather distorted.
Oh, it was because it was too loud.
Yeah. Okay, so this little guy is the NeuroSky mind wave, and as Mark said, we're kind of interested in the biometrics, biometric devices, and I came across this a couple years ago when I was getting into grad school, and this thing is marketed as like teaching you how to pay attention. You can discipline your brain, and it'll learn attention, and it didn't work. But this one, you don't have to like paste things to your scalp or anything like that. It just has a sensor that sits on your forehead. And it's portable. It's only like $80. And it comes with a software development kit. So then you can do whatever you want with it, right? Is it accurate? I don't know. I don't think so. But it measures something, and it provides enough feedback that you can like figure out how to work with it. And it calls it attention, but who knows what it is. It also, so it provides all of these raw measurements for alpha, beta, delta, gamma waves, but like those are really hard to control. So most of what we have done works with these aggregate metrics that the headset provides for attention and meditation. And it also has a blink sensor, which is pretty fun to work with too. So some of the initial projects that I worked with this headset on were the alternate reality game Speculation. As like what the module I worked on was kind of this spoof of neuromarketing and used the modulation of attention and meditation as a way of commenting on the attention economy. So we use these metrics as a way to drive game mechanics. Another project I worked on with Patrick Lemieux was this Brainwave Mario game, which was basically the first level of Mario, and it was kind of cool. You didn't touch the keyboard, you didn't do anything. You just like really focused, and by really focusing, you would move Mario forward. By blinking, you would make it jump. So very literally with these games, if you were not paying attention to them, you could not play them. If you weren't paying attention, or at least what the headset thinks is attention, Mario wouldn't move. Like if you were kind of paying half attention, Mario would get to the first gap and you would die. But so one of the major problems with this though was when thinking about the attention economy, like you can only hook one of these up to one computer. Which, you know, that's kind of cool, but not as cool as we wanted. So in the lab, we're thinking, how can we expand this outwards and have something that is more collective? And so I pieced together a Python script that basically acts as a proxy and forwards all of the information from each client computer to a server. And from that server, then we can pass that information off to any application that we want. So it's a cool framework. You can get the code at this at our repository there if you want to scribble that down real quick, or I think we have the link at the end. So two of the projects really quick that we're working on with kind of this more collective model. One of them is a Node.js application that you can find at mindwave.s-1lab.org that is kind of very experimental at this point, but it is like a huge Google Doc where anybody can go and type in whatever they want. Everyone sees the same thing, but if you hook up these headsets to it, the collective attention of the audience then starts mutating the text. So it will start adding text to the end if people are bored. It'll like reverse, it'll substitute letters, things like that, just to kind of like, you know, play with this, make people more interested. And the other project that Shane is going to talk about a little bit more is we can hook this up to a platform like Isadora through the OSC protocol. And from there, we can then control video playback rate, like frame rate. We can control frame size. We can control all sorts of overlays that kind of bring out this collective idea. And the idea here was really to have some sort of event at some point, sit down like 5 or 6 people with these headsets on, and then have them watch a movie where they really need to pay attention to actually get through it, or something like that. And Shane is going to take over now and unpack.
All right, so one of the ways to kind of think about what this is, what these projects are, is in terms of what Mark Sample has called weird DH, weird digital humanities, right? Where the object is really to weird things out, right, for different reasons. One of the ways that I've been thinking about doing it, I've done some research on so-called post-cinema, and I've been thinking about doing a kind of a post-cinematic reenactment of early cinema to kind of complicate histories of cinema and post-cinema and early cinema, right? And so in this case, I'm taking this mind wave thing and having an audience using Luke's code so that we can have collective audiences, but having an audience watch It could be either early cinema, it could be contemporary, it could be Michael Bay, whatever, right? But where their attention or whatever gets registered as attention in this device has an effect on the playback. So maybe the speed will be adjusted, right? And this is, I think, a kind of a reenactment of early cinema because, right, the playback speed was not standardized until around 1929 with the introduction of sound, right? So before that, there was a variable speed of playback, which was a kind of a feature, not a bug, of the early kind of cinematic apparatus. So the projectionist, who was more of a film editor and an entertainer in his own right, could alter the playback speed to adjust for people's interest, right? Which might be registered in people cheering or booing or yawning, right? So, but they could only respond to outward signs of attention, right? So what we can do is read people's attention directly, or whatever gets registered as attention, right? And so we can render this attention visible, and to some extent open it up to conscious and collective efforts to modulate it, right? So what that might look like is here. We've got some early cinema stuff going on up here, and it's being fed through Isadora here in order to enact this kind of weird digital humanities experiment. Right, so obviously we're raising some questions. You can see it, the size of the screen is going up and down depending on whether you're paying attention. It raises questions about the datification of a data stream that gets nominally called attention. But I think that what it also does more productively is that it raises questions about the way that attention gets constructed in technical devices, both in early cinema and now, right? And it is, after all, an experimental setup, and you get the feeling at the end it's a setup, right? And we've been framed, but maybe it's a productive way of approaching it. And if you're interested, here's the link to the code which makes it work. Cool. Thank you.
All right, next up is going to be S-Traits, Generative Authorship and Emergence Lab with Bill Seaman and John Sipko.
I don't know if we'll be able to switch tonight.
Do you want to?
After? No, after.
Oh, after, sure. Okay, sure,
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm John. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Emergence Lab, our goals and or our objectives really. I'm going to try to talk less than I usually do and show more. I have two things to show you, so we'll see how that goes. The Emergence Lab is co-directed by Bill Seaman and myself, and we're basically focused on using technology to create new forms of creative work, artistic work, in sound, in music, in literature, text, visual media, that sort of thing. And one example of a project that Bill and I worked on in this context is the recent album we released called S-Traits, which is an album of generative electronic music. And in order to create this project, this music, we invented an artificially intelligent collaborator that we called Bearing Straits. And this system takes a raw input, in other words, sound files, and creates a first draft, a first idea. So if you can think of what a human composer or a human artist would do with the first idea, a draft, you can maybe take that, hold that in your mind for a second, and listen to what our system will do with the first idea. In other words, something that invites collaboration from human musicians, invites elaboration. So what this will do is take a fragment of text that Bill wrote and combine it with some bits of sound that it finds in the database. Usually we use about 110 hours in our database. Today we're using 20 sound files. So it's a little bit limited in terms of its resources, but probably just as unpredictable. Okay, and if I decided that I hated that, I could just say, no, I'd like something else. Or one more time. So right now, I think it was using organ samples, piano samples, and some vocal samples. Now, to give you an idea of what we did as a final product with these initial ideas that the computer generated, I'll play a short video that combines a track from the album, The Clicking, from Estrates, with footage of Bill's Engine of Many Senses, which we used for the record release event in Brooklyn at Pioneer Works in October.
So Todd Barrett helped do the programming on the generative engine.
The video engine?
Yeah. So the system draws on database aesthetics, where there's an elaborate database of many different images, many different texts that can combine and recombine, and a series of primitives that the texts fall out on, three-dimensional 3D models, texture maps, and it's basically thinking like what John was saying. We talk about parameterization, or thinking about what are the aesthetics that we would have, and then re-embodying those in a system. So in this case, in my own PhD, recombinant poetics was the title that I gave for this kind of work. But now what we're doing, as a second, should I go ahead and talk about it? Yeah. As a very different area, is an area that I call recombinant informatics. And I wrote a book with Otto Rossler, who's probably known best for his work in chaos theory, on thinking about the future of AI and robotics. And we wrote the book in a very strange form. It was hundreds of little micro chapters, and each one had a kind of idea. And the idea was that in a book like this, you could take any two of those chapters, and they would begin to suggest a new research paradigm. What's happening in AI often is that one group is working on one thing, like vision systems, and somebody else might be working on language and search systems. Somebody else might be working on robotic movement. Nobody brings all of these ideas together. So then the publisher of Leonardo magazine suggested, Bill, how can you like go forward after this book? What can you do with it? So I started working with Todd Barrett again on a project called the Insight Engine. And what the Insight Engine does is that you upload a series of papers or media elements by different researchers, and then you can choose any two elements, so it's a completely transdisciplinary search engine. It goes into the entire corpus, which has already been looked at in terms of semantic, statistical, and a third kind of data, and it does a kind of positioning of the most relevant things. And then you can decide, do I want to keep that thing or do I not want to keep that thing? And so it was this very interesting way of using kind of text scraping, but then you could also give annotations, keywords, abstracts as other ways to further search the data. So the new thing that's happening now is, having read about Mauricio Forte's very interesting cyber archaeology, we started to think, well, could we take that kind of engine, that kind of search engine, and leverage it with a whole series of different kinds of archaeological data? So we know we can use it for kind of creative, poetic aspects. So in this case, what we're hoping to do, and this is a future grant, is to bring a series of different aspects together. So for example, you have acquisition, but beginning to have acquisition in a way that you have text which can be searchable. You then also have the annotation, so you have many different kinds of markup on all different kinds of media. You have also thinking about what I call polysensing. So in the way that we as humans build up knowledge about environment through multimodal sensing, we're imagining machinic senses that pay attention to the archaeological, the cyber archaeological environment and build up knowledge. Now the idea is later that when you have the virtual environment, instead of bringing the aesthetic elements together, I could do a query and it would call up very different kinds of data that isn't usually brought together. So it might have spatial information, it might have oral histories, it might have photographs, it might have maps, with the idea that these kinds of associations might lead to an accretive new knowledge. And that's probably the end of our time, too.
It is, but
Yeah.
What did you want to plug in? Is it a...
Well, I was going to show Insight Engine, but I think it's okay.
Yeah.
If anybody's interested, I can send them an email that has a video of Insight Engine, so you can take a look at it.
All right, great, thanks guys. All right, so next up is going to be found objects and fireflies with Scott Lindroth.
Hello, and I am a composer teaching in the music department. I will say that most of my work is involves conventional ensembles, instruments, and whatnot. And I'd like to say that this work in progress really has me out on a limb. So I'm excited to share it with you. Some of you may know that some species of male fireflies will synchronize their flashes. This video is made in Great Smoky Mountains. You can see the individual fireflies initially flashing independently, but over time, the flashing comes into synchrony. And the dynamics of a system like this are really interesting because there can't be any leader or conductor that shapes or coordinates the performance of the fireflies. It's a good example of a self-organizing system. Each firefly, you can see it. Yeah. Each firefly reacts to a flash produced by its neighbor, and it adjusts its own charging cycle, either speeding it up or slowing it down, to bring its flashes into sync. And what happens is that collectively, the entire swarm will start flashing in sync. It's really cool and very surprising. In 1990, Lenny Murillo and Stephen Strogatz developed a mathematical model of this process, and they described fireflies as a network of pulse-coupled oscillators. And this graph shows the charging function of a firefly. It's also the charging function of a capacitor that you would use in a circuit. And the phase of the charging is along the x-axis, that's a phi, and for each phase position, you can find the state of the system, which is represented by x. And when x reaches 1, the system is, the firefly is charged, it flashes, and then the charging cycle begins all over again. So under normal circumstances, if there is no other firefly, it will start charging, and it just moves very linearly along the x-axis. But if it happens to detect a neighbor flashing, say at this point, phi sub t, we can find the state of the system at that point, and then as a response to the flash, that state is boosted by some amount, and what we'll do is then we go back and find the new phase offset for that new state, and resume the charging cycle from that new phase offset. So this is a very simplified model of what might be actually going on in a firefly. And in the model, what Strogatz and Murillo were able to prove is that no matter how many such pulse-coupled oscillators you have, they will necessarily come into sync if they follow these dynamics. So this really excited me, and I thought, okay, I wrote a program that would implement this process. And what I do is that I have this first test, just 7 virtual fireflies. They're just independent routines that are starting at random times and running independently of each other. A flash is represented by a short little melody that is played by the routine or the virtual firefly. And over time, as it runs, the melody will gradually come into sync. And I can control how fast that syncing process takes place. So I'll display this, and what I'm using here are just simple instruments. These are little models that I made of gongs, wine glasses, pot lids, just, it sort of sounds like wind chimes. Here everything's out of sync. Okay, now we'll go to the third iteration. I skipped the second. It's my favorite one, where it's starting to become coherent, but it's still a little bit out of sync. Now, when we get later on to the 6th iteration, everything is pretty much lined up. Okay, again, what's interesting to me is that I just start this off randomly, and I just let it run, and over time, those individual voices will come into sync. And you can imagine the complexity of the system when you have thousands of fireflies interacting in this way. Each firefly's flash is influenced by others in the swarm. So as I said, Murillo and Strogatz proved that no matter how many such fireflies you have, it will come into sync. So this sound design, it sounds nice, it's very pretty. I'm thinking that this is going to be a live performance piece. I wanted this to be something that you would see on stage. And I wanted to be able to see the instruments being played as opposed to just having samples that are played off of the computer. And so that would suggest, well, you have live performers play this. That turns out to be a problem because, we are wired to play in sync. I think the most beautiful part of that was when they're slightly out of sync. And it is really hard to be able to play precisely out of sync, let alone start from a completely randomized performance and have it gradually come into sync, and then let alone having many musicians trying to partake in that process. I'm interested in it, I want to try it, but I can't figure out how to write it down even. It's very difficult notationally. So this led me to start building my own instruments in my garage. I've been acquiring quite an amazing collection of, I have an amazing collection of sprockets, flanges, flywheels, frames, hubcaps, heat sinks, fire extinguishers, and even a motorcycle engine block that I picked up from a recycling center here in Durham. And I built simple frames for these, and then there's a little solenoid actuator that will play the instruments. And those actuators are controlled by my Firefly algorithm running on my computer. In addition, every instrument has a microphone that will capture the audio as it's playing, and then I can take that and do more signal processing on it. And this will all be happening in real time. So, well, this is what it looks like and what it sounds like. So this is, I just let this run. You'll hear the very initial statement where everything is randomized, and then I jump further in where I add a lot more signal processing. You'll notice when that happens, believe me. And things are, the processes move further along, so. Okay, now something else is added. Get the idea. So this will be, I haven't figured out actually how to move this into a on my garage. It'll be premiered in Chicago this winter, so terrible time to transport these instruments. And we'll have 2 live percussionists that will be interacting with this setup as well as other instruments that I've built, as well as instruments they have. With them, these are wonderful players, and I can explore that syncing process with them. Since just the 2 of them. Humans are used to playing together. It's interesting to tell them to play just slightly apart, and I think it'll be very exciting to work on this with them. So that's it. Thanks.
Great, so last up is going to be Provoke Digital Sound Studies with Mary Kate Lingold and Whitney Tretian.
I'll go ahead and get started talking while we get set up. My name is Mary Kate Lingold, and I'm a doctoral candidate in English at Duke. This is Whitney Tretian. She's an assistant professor of digital humanities in English at UNC, but also a graduate of Duke. Our third collaborator on the project we're going to be talking about is Darren Miller, who's a music PhD from Duke and now a visiting assistant professor at UNC School of the Arts. Our collaboration, we call ourselves Soundbots, and we've been working together for 4 years. And it all got started with a graduate digital scholarship initiative that the Franklin Humanities Institute started to get graduate students involved in digital projects. And we applied for a grant. It's always fun when you go to digital stuff, like everything always goes bananas. It's the fun part about it. So anyway, we were really interested in the possibility for sound studies and digital humanities to get along. We're all really interested in sound and music and Roman scholarship, and interested in digital humanities. And 4 years ago, we thought, this is a really cool opportunity in terms of digital scholarship and the future of digital publishing in the academy to bring sound into academic publications and argumentation more holistically and integrating it on a deeper level. So we kind of approached this just dewy-eyed and excited about this possibility and wondering what new forms of scholarship could take advantage of the opportunity to use digital environments to incorporate sound. So the grant that we received from the Franklin Humanities Institute allowed. Enjoy. This is formal innovation at its best. Anyway, this really neat grant allowed us to kind of have a long thinking process, and as we started studying what's out there and connecting with scholars around the country, we discovered, of course, that there's a lot of people out there already doing really awesome stuff with sound and digital spaces, and instead of trying to come up with our own tool that was going to fix everything, let's see how we can build a community around this and maybe create a publication. So we solicited, we put out a call for what we call provocations. So it's really trying to work against the notion of the conventional forms of academic scholarship and invite people who had just their crazy, wacky projects that didn't have a home. We wanted to give them a home and to give them some funding. So we actually used our funding to fund other people's projects. And just some examples of the people who we were excited to begin collaborating with. Another Duke PhD composition student, Ken Stewart, wanted to build a guitar body that would, in its object, contain the history of electrical processing, is that the right word, in guitars? And so he was able, with these funds, to go buy some equipment. I think he actually bought a bandsaw, is that correct? Which was a first. And for the DHI, the board accountants that had to push that through. But so he was able to build this object and then later document the process of building the object and the sound that it made on our website. Another project that we feature in Provoke is a collective of artist scholars in Richmond, Virginia, and they have built a sound studio and artist space within the Richmond City Jail where they collaborate with inmates. They're really interested in a teacher-student model, so these aren't necessarily workshops. They're creating artworks together. And again, this is some praxis that's really born out of their scholarship, but wouldn't necessarily have a typical home in an academic publication to feature these wonderful artworks they're making. So then I'm about to pass the mic over to Whitney. So we solicit all these projects, we kind of help them come to fruition, and then our job was to conceive of the kind of container that could hold all of these different works, and that was our intervention and our provocation, this website that we love. And I'm gonna let Whitney talk to you a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we had a couple goals with the website. The first and actual main goal was to create a digital humanities project that used sound as a mode in a meaningful way and really sonify the web. And this is actually a really difficult task because, of course, the web is a very silent space in many ways, right? The early days of MIDI have totally scarred us. We all wear headphones and browse with our mute buttons, right? So nobody wants thorns started glaring at you. So in many ways, we're rubbing up against conventions of the web. So we thought long and hard about how we wanted to do this. We landed on the solution of basically attaching sounds to visual artifacts and making somebody have to engage with the website in that way by not offering any textual information at first. So when you first come on the website, all you have are these kinds of images, and as you browse over, you'll start to get sounds. And these are, we call them sonic tags. We asked all of our authors to produce these. They're just short little tags that give you a kind of flavor of the project. So then once you browse in further, you're immediately presented with this visual image that, again, kind of directs your attention to the audiovisual mode within the project, and then we have an audio player that wraps the entire page. So what we were trying to play here with in terms of design conventions was usually, if the project has sound, you have something like SoundCloud, right? You have a bunch of text on a blog post, and you embed a SoundCloud file. And that's really awesome. I've done that in my own projects, but we were trying to flip that model and say that sound isn't annotating text as the primary mode, but in fact, sound is the primary mode, and the text and the images are annotating that. So that's why the audio player is kind of wrapping the entire thing, and then the textual information like an abstract and other supplementary materials, like for instance, this woman, Steph Sarasso, she did this amazing, she's an interesting scholar of digital rhetoric and did this amazing project on different soundscapes that she's experienced, but she's also very interested in digital disability studies. And so she had us include a video along with the kind of soundscape she made, as well as a script of the project that has embedded audio clips, so you can engage with it from multiple different dimensions. And then I'll share maybe just a little bit of this project, which is a soundscape that it's a collaboration between the scholar Myron Beasley and the artist Robert Peterson, and they found themselves in Haiti together several days before the 2010 earthquake in Port-au-Prince, and they were doing recordings together. He's an ethnographer, Rob Peterson's a sound artist, Myron's an ethnographer, and Rob is a sound artist. And they wanted to do something with these materials that was scholarly, but that wasn't a kind of conventional scholarly publication. So they produced this really beautiful 30-minute soundscape and did a lot of kind of, the soundscape itself is quite abstract, but in the project, we invited them to do some theoretical framing, which again, here is kind of annotating the sounds. The idea is you come in, you listen, and then you dive into the supplementary materials, which here include additional images and sounds as well. So we became really concerned that some of this was a little bit too abstract for a scholarly audience, and so we invited our collaborators to do interviews with us, and at least 2 projects we have interviews with our collaborators. And then we supplemented that material and created a player such that when you click on this kind of supplementary audio material, the main audio pauses for a second. So here, Rob talks about his art education. So, and then you can go right back to the main audio. Is there anything you wanted to add tonight?
I think that gives you a little taste of the website, and we hope you'll go and explore. We hope it has a happy life online. And to that point, we're actually really grateful that Duke Libraries is going to be archiving the site, which has been a really interesting process, figuring out how to do that. So they sort of getting to see it from the cradle to the grave, as it were. And hopefully, in 50 years from now, people will still be able to reconstruct this, even if the browsers and all the software and stuff is no longer living. And also this led us to, we're co-editing a book collection with Duke Press that's also on digital sound studies, so it's sort of born out of this. So it's also an example of a digital project giving rise to a print publication, which we're very pleased with. And also finally want to shout out PhD Lab in Digital Knowledge because they also help support this project. So for 4 years we've been at it, yeah, still going. Thank you.
All right, that was amazing. So I heard that after the first session, some people wished that we could have had time for questions. So I was trying to think during this last moment how we should go about that. Should we make everyone who spoke stand up in front of the room? Or should we just see if people have questions? Or should we just go get some wine? What do people think?
Could we do it informally?
We can do it informally.
Yeah, that'd be
Okay.
great, just to
All right, we'll just do it
catch the
informally.
people.
All right, so let's just give a big round of applause to everyone.